From Shaq dropping $100,000 to own it to Al Pacino's improvised hat trick that made Michelle Pfeiffer genuinely laugh, Tony Montana's infamous yellow Cadillac has a wilder backstory than you'd imagine. This wasn't just any convertible. It featured tiger print upholstery that Elvira called somebody's nightmare, took over 10 seconds to hit 60 miles per hour despite weighing 2 tons, and was filmed using camera techniques pioneered by Hitchcock. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Scarface's 1963 Cadillac Series 62. Fact 1. It's actually not. If you've ever tried to look up Tony Montana's iconic yellow Cadillac online, you've probably noticed something confusing. Half the websites, merchandise listings, and even some official collectibles call it a 1980 Cadillac Eldorado, while others insist it's a 1963 Series 62. So which one is actually correct? Well, the car that Al Pacino drives in Scarface is definitively a 1963 Cadillac Series 62 convertible, not an Eldorado, and definitely not from 1980. This mix-up has been around for decades, and it's easy to see why people get it wrong. For starters, the movie is set during the 1980 Mariel boat lift when thousands of Cuban refugees came to Miami, so naturally some people assumed Tony would be driving a car from that era. On top of that, Cadillac's Eldorado line was incredibly famous and luxurious. So many fans just assumed that's what a flashy drug dealer character would choose. But here's the thing, the production team specifically picked a vintage 1963 model to show off Tony's tacky, over-the-top taste during his early rise to power. Even more confusing is that the Scarface video game, which came out years after the film, labels the car as the QM convertible, and sometimes calls it an Eldorado in different versions, which only added fuel to the fire. Major toy companies like Jada Toys have released die-cast replicas with packaging that says 1963 Cadillac Series 62, yet some online sellers still list them incorrectly as Eldorados. The Scarface fan wiki even perpetuates this mistake by calling it a Cadillac Eldorado in its main description. Part of the problem is that back in the 1950s and early 60s, the Eldorado actually started as a special trim package of the Series 62 before becoming its own standalone model, so the names were closely related for years. But by 1963, they were distinct models, and what appears in Scarface is clearly the Series 62 based on the body style, trim, and design features visible throughout the film. Fact 2. Shaquille O'Neal bought the actual movie car. When you're 7 feet 1 inch tall and worth hundreds of millions of dollars, you can pretty much buy anything you want. And for Shaquille O'Neal, that included one of the most iconic cars in movie history. The NBA legend is such a massive fan of Scarface that he actually purchased the original 1963 Cadillac Series 62 convertible that Al Pacino drove in the film, and he reportedly paid around $100,000 to make it his own. This wasn't just some replica or tribute car built to look like the movie version. This was the actual vehicle that appeared on screen with those unforgettable tiger print seats that Michelle Pfeiffer's character called somebody's nightmare. But owning the car was only the beginning of the story, because Shaq couldn't exactly squeeze his massive frame into a car designed for people of average height back in 1963. The basketball superstar had to make some serious modifications to actually drive his prized possession without feeling like he was folded up inside a sardine can. The most important change was pushing the seats back by 9 full inches, giving him the legroom he desperately needed to fit behind the wheel comfortably. He also installed a completely modern sound system because, as Shaq has said many times, his #1 rule when getting into any vehicle is no talking until the music is connected. The customization didn't stop there, though. Shaq had the classic Cadillac outfitted with a brand new air suspension system to help support his weight and provide a smoother ride, all while keeping those iconic tiger print seats completely untouched and original. He's been spotted cruising around his hometown of Orlando in the yellow convertible, and he even used it to make a grand entrance at the United States Grand Prix, showing off his love for both the movie and the car to crowds of fans. During interviews where he's shown off his massive car collection, Shaq has playfully called out to Michelle Pfeiffer herself, saying, "Michelle, "Come ride with me, baby," while standing next to the famous Cadillac. Fact 3. The hat scene was completely unscripted. One of the most charming moments in Scarface happened completely by accident, and it captures a genuine reaction that director Brian De Palma loved so much he decided to keep it in the final film. During the car dealership scene where Tony Montana is showing off his yellow 1963 Cadillac to Elvira Hancock, Al Pacino decided to pull a playful prank on his co-star Michelle Pfeiffer that she had absolutely no idea was coming. While Pfeiffer was looking away and adjusting her hair, Pacino quietly reached over and snatched the hat right off her head without her noticing, then casually placed it on his own head as if nothing had happened. When Pfeiffer turned back around and saw Pacino sitting there, wearing her hat with a mischievous grin on his face, her reaction was completely real and unrehearsed. The smile and laughter you see on screen is Michelle Pfeiffer genuinely amused and caught off guard by what her co-star had just done. To her credit, she managed to stay in character even though she was genuinely surprised, and she quickly improvised a response to keep the scene going. Pacino then ad-libbed the line, asking if she would kiss him if he wore the hat, and Pfeiffer smoothly responded by telling him that playtime was over before laughing again. De Palma recognized immediately that this spontaneous moment was pure gold because it showed a softer, more playful side of the relationship between Tony and Elvira. The scene worked perfectly to demonstrate Elvira gradually warming up to Tony Montana despite her initial disgust with his tacky car and nouveau riche sensibilities. What makes this moment even more special is that it reveals the strong chemistry and trust between Pacino and Pfeiffer on set, showing that despite their characters' toxic relationship in the film, the two actors actually got along famously during production and were comfortable enough with each other to improvise and play around between takes. Fact 4. It was painfully slow. Despite its size. When you picture a drug lord's car in a movie, you probably imagine something fast and powerful that can speed away from danger at a moment's notice. But Tony Montana's iconic yellow Cadillac was actually one of the slowest vehicles ever driven by a crime boss on the big screen. The 1963 Cadillac Series 62 convertible weighed a massive 4,544 pounds, which is about as heavy as two average cars combined. Despite having a 390 cubic inch V8 engine under the hood that produced 325 horsepower, all that weight meant the car was painfully slow to accelerate. It took more than 10 seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour from a standstill, which might not sound terrible until you realize that most modern economy cars can do it in about 7 or 8 seconds. The quarter-mile drag time was even worse at 17.6 seconds, making it slower than many family sedans of its era. The reason for this disappointing performance wasn't the engine's fault, since Cadillac's V8 was actually quite powerful for the time. The problem was simply physics. When you're trying to push over 2 tons of metal, leather, and chrome down the road, even 325 horses struggle to get the job done quickly. But here's the thing that makes perfect sense for Tony Montana's character. This car was never meant to be driven for performance. It was meant to be driven for showing off. The bright yellow paint job, the outrageous tiger print upholstery, and the massive size were all about making a statement and turning heads on the streets of Miami. Speed didn't matter when the whole point was for everyone to see you cruising slowly past in your ridiculous convertible. In fact, the car's slow, heavy handling actually made it better for the kind of leisurely, look-at-me driving that Tony loved to do. This perfectly captures the character's obsession with appearance over substance, which becomes a major theme throughout the film as his empire grows. Fact 5. The tiger seats were faux fur. When Tony Montana proudly shows off his bright yellow Cadillac to Elvira in the dealership scene, the most eye-catching feature isn't the paint job, but rather the wild tiger-striped interior that covers nearly every surface inside the vehicle. What might surprise fans is that despite how luxurious and expensive the upholstery appears on screen, the tiger pattern wasn't made from real animal fur at all, but was actually custom faux upholstery specifically created for the film's production. The decision to use fake fur rather than authentic tiger skin made perfect sense for both practical and ethical reasons, since real tiger fur would have been extraordinarily expensive, difficult to work with in a car that needed to withstand weeks of filming, and would have raised serious concerns even back in 1983 when the movie was shot. The tiger print upholstery became such an iconic and recognizable element of the Scarface Cadillac that when toy companies like Jada Toys began producing official die-cast replica models decades later, they went to extraordinary lengths to recreate the fuzzy texture of those famous seats. The replicas feature specially flocked surfaces on the seats, door panels, floor mats, and even the sun visors to give collectors an authentic tactile experience that matches what appeared in the film. These flocked interiors use darker and lighter areas with soft fades between colors to create a realistic tiger stripe effect, and the stripes themselves have just enough blurring to look genuinely lifelike rather than simply painted on. The attention to detail in these miniature reproductions shows just how memorable and important the tiger seats became to the car's identity, turning what could have been seen as a tasteless design choice into one of the most recognizable automotive interiors in cinema history. Even Michelle Pfeiffer's character Elvira immediately notices and comments on the interior when she tells Tony the whole car looks like somebody's nightmare, making the upholstery central to establishing Tony's questionable taste during his early rise to power. Fact 6. Hitchcock's camera trick made it famous. The Porsche dealership scene where Tony shows off his yellow Cadillac to Elvira features one of the most technically impressive camera shots in the entire movie, even though most viewers probably don't consciously notice it. As Tony walks around the rear of his Cadillac in the parking lot, the camera performs what's called a reverse zoom dolly, which is also known as the vertigo effect after Alfred Hitchcock's 1958 thriller where he first used the technique. This camera move creates a deeply unsettling visual sensation where the background seems to collapse and compress while the foreground subject stays roughly the same size on screen, producing an almost dreamlike distortion of perspective that perfectly captures Tony's emotional state as he prepares to make his move on Frank Lopez's girlfriend. The technique requires incredibly precise coordination between multiple crew members working in perfect sync. The camera operator has to roll the camera backwards smoothly on tracks laid out by the grips while the focus puller simultaneously adjusts both the focus ring and the zoom control on the lens at exactly the right speed. If either person is even slightly off in their timing, the entire shot falls apart and has to be attempted again. Director Brian De Palma chose to use this effect specifically to show the change in Tony's mood and confidence level, making the world around him and Elvira visually disappear as he becomes fixated on winning her over. Hitchcock had pioneered this technique in Vertigo and later used it again in Marnie, and Steven Spielberg made it famous in the 1975 film Jaws during the beach attack scene. For the Scarface production team to pull off this complex shot in a single take during exterior filming at a real Porsche dealership on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles demonstrates just how committed De Palma was to using sophisticated visual storytelling techniques throughout the film, even in scenes that could have been shot much more simply. Fact 7. It was actually 20 years old. During filming, here's the thing that makes Tony Montana's yellow Cadillac even more interesting than it already looks. When Scarface hit theaters in December of 1983, that convertible sitting in the dealership was already 2 decades old. The film is set during the Mariel boat lift of 1980 and the months that follow, meaning Tony is supposedly buying this car sometime in 1980 or 1981. But the production team deliberately chose a 1963 Cadillac Series 62 instead of something from the early 80s. This wasn't an accident or a budget issue, because Universal Studios had plenty of money to rent or buy a contemporary luxury car if they wanted to. Director Brian De Palma and the production designers made a very specific choice to put Tony in this vintage convertible because it perfectly captured something essential about his character at that moment in the story. Tony Montana is fresh off the streets. He's got some money in his pocket for the first time in his life, and he has absolutely no idea how wealthy people are supposed to behave or what they're supposed to drive. He thinks this bright yellow 1963 Cadillac with tiger print seats is the height of luxury and success, when in reality it's a 20-year-old used car that screams new money and bad taste. The choice becomes even more meaningful when you consider Tony's car progression throughout the film. He starts out riding in a beat-up 1968 Chevrolet Impala with no hubcaps, then moves up to this gaudy vintage Cadillac and eventually buys a sleek 1979 Porsche 928 and a Rolls-Royce once he truly makes it big. The vintage Cadillac sits right in the middle of that journey, representing Tony's transition from street thug to aspiring kingpin. He's trying to look successful, but he doesn't quite know how yet, and that outdated convertible with its outrageous interior tells that story perfectly without a single word of dialogue. Fact 8. The car barely appears in Miami. When you watch Scarface and see Tony Montana cruising around in that bright yellow Cadillac with the outrageous tiger print seats, you'd naturally assume those scenes were filmed on the sun-drenched streets of Miami, right where the story takes place. But here's the twist that most fans never realize. Almost every scene featuring that iconic convertible was actually shot thousands of miles away in Beverly Hills, California. The most memorable sequence with the Cadillac, where Tony takes Elvira to look at a new Porsche while trying to impress her with his flashy ride, was filmed at a real Porsche dealership located at 8425 Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The production team had originally planned to shoot nearly the entire movie in Miami, and they even sent executive producer Louis Stroller down to Florida to scout locations and set everything up. However, Miami's Cuban community and local politicians strongly objected to the film's storyline, feeling it portrayed Cuban immigrants in an extremely negative light. The controversy became so intense that Miami columnists wrote critical pieces about the production, and community leaders applied enough pressure that Universal Studios eventually made the decision to pull out of Florida almost entirely. The studio called the production team and essentially said that if they were going to make this movie, it would have to be filmed back in Los Angeles instead. So the crew packed up and recreated Miami in California, using palm trees, pastel colors, and careful location selection to fake the Florida vibe. The Beverly Hills Porsche dealership, which was actually called Beverly Hills Porsche Audi at the time of filming, provided the perfect Spanish colonial revival architecture that could pass for an upscale Miami car showroom. The building had originally opened in the 1920s as a drive-in market called the Clock Market before being converted into the dealership. Only a handful of exterior shots in Miami actually made it into the film, meaning that iconic yellow Cadillac spent most of its screen time pretending to be in Florida while sitting on a California street corner. Fact 9. Elvira's iconic insult was scripted. When Michelle Pfeiffer delivers one of the most memorable burns in Scarface, calling Tony Montana's prized Cadillac somebody's nightmare, it wasn't an improvised moment of disgust, but rather a carefully crafted line from screenwriter Oliver Stone. The insult appears during the Porsche dealership scene, where Tony is proudly showing off his bright yellow 1963 Cadillac with its outrageous tiger print interior to Elvira Hancock, the woman he's desperately trying to impress. Stone wrote this specific line to accomplish multiple storytelling goals at once, and it's a perfect example of how a single piece of dialogue can reveal everything about character dynamics and class differences. The line works on several levels that Stone intentionally built into the script. First, it establishes Elvira as someone with sophisticated taste, who isn't easily impressed by flashy displays of wealth, setting her apart from Tony's more working-class sensibilities. Second, it highlights Tony's complete lack of refinement at this point in his journey, as he genuinely believes this garish vehicle represents success and status. Third, it foreshadows the cultural and aesthetic gap between them that will plague their relationship throughout the film. Stone understood that Tony's choice of a vintage Cadillac covered in animal print upholstery perfectly symbolized nouveau riche excess, taken to an almost comical extreme. What makes the line even more effective is Pfeiffer's delivery, which conveys both amusement and genuine distaste without being cruel enough to completely shut Tony down. Stone gave her a line that allowed her to reject Tony's taste while still maintaining the flirtatious tension between them. The word choice of somebody's nightmare is particularly inspired because it's not just saying the car is ugly, but that it represents a fever dream of bad taste, something that could only exist in a world where money and class are completely disconnected. This single scripted moment became so iconic that it's now inseparable from the car's legacy in popular culture. Fact 10. The 1963 model had just been redesigned. The 1963 Cadillac Series 62 that Tony Montana drives in Scarface wasn't just any random vintage car that the production team happened to find. It represented a very specific moment in American automotive history. Cadillac had completely redesigned the Series 62 for the 1963 model year, and the changes were significant enough that car enthusiasts still consider it one of the most distinctive looks of the entire decade. The most noticeable change was what Cadillac did with the tail fins, those iconic pointed extensions that had become almost synonymous with 50s and early 60s American luxury cars. By 1963, the massive soaring tail fins that had defined Cadillacs throughout the late 50s were starting to look dated, so the designers trimmed them down considerably to create what they called a lower profile. The new fins were still there, but they were sleeker and more horizontal, giving the car a longer, bolder appearance that stretched the visual line of the entire vehicle. The front end also received a major update, with the front fenders projecting almost 5 inches further forward than the 1962 model, which made the car look even more imposing when you saw it head-on. Cadillac also completely eliminated the body-side sculpturing that had been a feature on previous years, opting instead for cleaner, more streamlined sides that emphasized the car's length, rather than breaking it up with decorative elements. One detail that most people wouldn't notice just from watching the movie is that Cadillac significantly improved the soundproofing for the 1963 model. The company added insulation to both the floor and the firewall to keep engine noise out of the passenger compartment, which was a big deal for a luxury car where quietness equaled quality. They also redesigned and lightened the 390 cubic inch V8 engine, which is why all that extra sound insulation was necessary in the first place. What makes the 1963 model even more historically interesting is that it turned out to be the last year for the Series 62 name. In 1964, Cadillac renamed the line to Calais, and they also stopped offering convertibles entirely that year, making the 63 convertible the final chapter of an automotive era. Fact 11. Production used faded paint as camouflage. When you watch Scarface and see Tony Montana cruising around in that bright yellow 1963 Cadillac, you might think the production team spent hours polishing it to perfection for the cameras. But here's the weird truth. The car's slightly faded and worn paintwork wasn't a mistake or an oversight. It was actually a clever advantage that helped the filmmakers avoid a major technical problem during shooting. The paint on the Cadillac had dulled just enough over the years that it didn't create the mirror-like reflections that a freshly painted car would have produced, and this turned out to be incredibly useful when filming the street scenes. During outdoor filming, especially in the scene where Tony makes a U-turn across Ocean Drive in Miami, the production crew had massive camera equipment set up all around the car. There were large camera cranes, dollies, lighting rigs, and dozens of crew members standing nearby to capture the perfect shot. If the Cadillac had been freshly painted with a glossy, mirror-bright finish, all of that equipment and all those people would have been clearly reflected in the car's bodywork, completely ruining the illusion that this was just Tony Montana driving around Miami in his personal vehicle. The reflections would have exposed the entire behind-the-scenes setup and made it obvious that this was a movie production rather than a genuine scene. The faded yellow paint essentially acted as natural camouflage for the production team. Because the surface wasn't perfectly reflective anymore, the camera operators and lighting technicians could position their equipment much closer to the car without worrying about seeing themselves in every shot. This gave director Brian De Palma and his cinematographer much more flexibility in how they framed the scenes and where they placed their cameras. They could get the angles they wanted without constantly having to digitally remove reflections in post-production, which would have been extremely expensive and time-consuming back in 1983. Sometimes the best movie magic comes from happy accidents, and in this case, an old car's weathered paint job saved the production both time and money while helping create one of cinema's most iconic vehicle moments. Fact 12. It symbolizes Tony's character arc. The yellow 1963 Cadillac with its outrageous tiger print interior wasn't just a random vehicle choice for Scarface. It was deliberately positioned as the middle chapter in Tony Montana's automotive journey from poverty to excess. When we first meet Tony after he leaves the refugee camp, he and his friends are driving around Miami in a beat-up 1968 Chevrolet Impala that doesn't even have hubcaps on the wheels. The car is barely running, painted in faded colors, and represents everything about Tony's status as a desperate immigrant with nothing to his name. Director Brian De Palma and screenwriter Oliver Stone wanted audiences to see Tony's progress through the cars he drives, using them as visual shorthand for his rising power and wealth in the cocaine trade. After Tony successfully completes his first major deal and starts working for drug lord Frank Lopez, he buys the Cadillac convertible as his first personal statement of success. The bright yellow paint and custom tiger-striped upholstery show that Tony has money now, but he still lacks the refined taste and sophistication that comes with real wealth. He's trying too hard to show off, which is exactly why Elvira dismisses the car as looking like somebody's nightmare. She recognizes immediately that the Cadillac is the choice of someone who grew up poor and is now overcompensating. The scene at the Porsche dealership where Tony shows off the Cadillac happens right before he decides to buy the silver Porsche 928, marking yet another step up in his world. By the time Tony takes over Miami's drug empire and builds his massive mansion, he's driving a Rolls-Royce, the ultimate symbol of having made it to the absolute top. The three cars together tell the complete story of Tony's rise from nothing to everything, with the yellow Cadillac representing that crucial middle phase where he has power and money but hasn't yet achieved the legitimacy and class he desperately craves. Fact 13. Modern replicas sell for thousands. If you've ever wanted to own Tony Montana's iconic yellow Cadillac but don't have Shaq's budget, you're in luck, because Jada Toys created some of the most detailed replicas of the Scarface car that money can buy. These aren't your average die-cast models sitting in a toy aisle for $20. Jada released limited edition versions in both 1:18 and 1:24 scale, and collectors have been paying serious money to get their hands on them ever since. What makes these replicas so special is the incredible attention to detail that Jada put into recreating every aspect of the car. The tiger-striped interior isn't just printed on flat metal like most toy cars. Instead, the seats, door panels, floor mats, and even the sun visors are actually flocked with fuzzy material that genuinely feels like fabric when you touch it. The stripes have darker and lighter areas with soft fades between the colors, creating a remarkably realistic look that captures the tackiness of Tony's ride perfectly. The exterior features the bright yellow paint job, chrome details, and even the correct wheel design from the movie. But here's where it gets even better. Each model comes with a miniature Al Pacino figure sitting in the driver's seat, and while it's more of a caricature than a perfect likeness, it's still a surprisingly good representation for a mass-produced figure at that scale. The packaging itself is collector-worthy, with a special black window box that's larger than Jada's standard design, featuring the Scarface logo, the iconic black and white image of Pacino, and even Tony Montana's TM crest on the end flaps. These limited edition pieces originally retailed for around $30 to $40, but on the secondary market, mint condition models in their original unopened boxes now regularly sell for hundreds of dollars, depending on the scale and condition. Some of the rarer 1:18 scale versions have fetched prices exceeding $200 on auction sites, making them genuine investment pieces for serious Scarface collectors and die-cast enthusiasts alike. Fact 14. It had a powerful but inefficient engine. When you look at Tony Montana's bright yellow Cadillac convertible in Scarface, you might assume it was a speed demon that could tear up the streets of Miami. But the reality was completely different. Under that massive hood sat a 390 cubic inch V8 engine that produced 325 horsepower, which sounds pretty impressive on paper, especially for a car from 1963. But here's where things get interesting. All that power was essentially wasted because the car weighed a staggering 4,544 pounds, which is over 2 tons of American steel and chrome. The performance numbers tell the whole story. This Cadillac took more than 10 seconds just to reach 60 miles per hour from a complete stop, and if you tried to drag race it, you'd be looking at a quarter-mile time of 17.6 seconds, which was considered dismal even by early 1960s standards. To put that in perspective, many family sedans from that era could outrun Tony's flashy convertible without breaking a sweat. The problem wasn't the engine itself. That V8 was a legitimate powerhouse, but rather the sheer bulk it had to push around. This terrible acceleration wasn't really a problem for the character of Tony Montana, though, because as the film makes clear, this car wasn't driven for performance at all. It was driven purely for showing off, and that's exactly what Tony wanted when he bought it. The bright yellow paint job and those outrageous tiger print seats were all about making a statement and turning heads, not about winning races. Cadillac designed these luxury convertibles for cruising in style and comfort, not for speed. The car came with enhanced soundproofing in the floor and firewall to keep engine noise out of the passenger compartment, which actually added even more weight to an already heavy vehicle. So while Tony's Cadillac looked like the ride of a powerful drug kingpin, it was really just a 2-ton status symbol that couldn't get out of its own way. Fact 15. Video game versions got it wrong. When the Scarface video game was released in 2006 for PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC, it gave players the chance to drive Tony Montana's iconic yellow convertible through a virtual Miami. But there was just one problem. The game developers got the car's name completely wrong. In the game, Tony's beloved Cadillac is labeled as the QM Convertible, a name that doesn't exist anywhere in Cadillac's actual production history. Even more confusing, many sources related to the game, including fan wikis and merchandise, frequently refer to it as a Cadillac Eldorado, which is also incorrect. The real car from the 1983 movie is a 1963 Cadillac Series 62 convertible, not an Eldorado. While the Eldorado was indeed part of Cadillac's lineup during the 1960s, it was a distinctly different and more expensive model with unique styling and features that set it apart from the Series 62. The Eldorado convertibles of that era had more elaborate trim, different tail fins, and cost significantly more money than the standard Series 62 models. The confusion likely stems from the fact that Cadillac's model naming conventions were complicated during this period, and the Eldorado name is simply more famous and recognizable to modern audiences. This mix-up in the video game has had lasting consequences because it perpetuated the confusion for an entire generation of fans who played the game without ever seeing the original film. When players search online for information about Tony Montana's car or look up collectible diecast models, they often encounter conflicting information, with some sources correctly identifying it as a Series 62 while others mistakenly call it an Eldorado. Even official merchandise and toy replicas sometimes use both names interchangeably on their packaging. The video game's incorrect labeling turned what should have been a straightforward piece of movie trivia into a decades-long debate among car enthusiasts and Scarface fans about which model Tony actually drove in Brian De Palma's classic film.